Good morning, podcast listeners. This is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast, and this is Raising 10, episode 19. Although when I marketed it, I put it as 18, but it doesn't really matter how many podcasts there are. If you want to check out all the podcasts from Raising 8 and Raising 10, you can go to my YouTube channel. Please hit subscribe while you're there, and under my playlist, there's all the parenting type fatherhood podcast. So I appreciate you listening. You can always get a hold of me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com or on any of my social media platforms, which I'm on most of them: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on all those places. So check out some past episodes, if you will. And if you find this one resonates with somebody that you know or it resonates with you, please share it. And I appreciate you listening to my clips when they put them on LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. So make sure you like those and listen up. So today, um, uh, before I get started, I want to reiterate: I'm not an expert. I have never written a book on uh, parenting. I never went to school about parenting. What I did do, though, is raise kids for now 39 years, still raising children. And I can tell you that I've learned a few things that they can't teach you in a book. Most what I've learned is what I've done where I failed as a parent, where I've succeeded as a parent, and where what I've done as an individual or in relationships has affected my kids. I'm not here to tell you how to raise your kids. That's up to you. Some of it you'll agree with, some of it you won't agree with. I get that. But coming from a whole entire two generations ago, you it'd be well worth it to listen in to what I'm going to talk about. So we're talking about: are you raising kids or are you raising roommates? I was the youngest of four. My sisters were 4 and 5 years older than me, and my brother was 7.5 years older than me. So I had the benefit of watching them as kids and how my parents handled them, um, as the baby of the family, as if you will. And when we were growing up, kind of the idea was you go to school, you graduate from high school, you get a job while you're in high school or right after high school, and then you figure out how you're going to move out. You're going to get roommates, you're going to do whatever. And we became independent relatively quick. One of the things our parents did is raised independent kids, all with our own beliefs, all with our own, strategies, our own ambition, all those things. Now, keep in mind, when I was getting raised in the 60s and 70s, in the 70s and 80s, you could go out and get a job. I worked in a grocery store. It was my first job when I was 16 years old, although I did some other entrepreneurial things before that. But when I had a real job, I was a courtesy clerk and in the grocery business and moved up, as fast as I could, got raises, got into supervisor positions, manager positions, and went to other industries within that industry and had quite a bit of success in beverage and things like that. But it's not as easy to do these days. I know that there's a lot of jobs getting taken over by AI. There's a lot of jobs that, the way the pay structure is these days, it's very difficult. I know it's expensive to move out. So here's how I moved out of my house. My dad passed away when I was 19 years old, and my mother met somebody short time after that that was just her knight in shining armor. Greatest guy, one of the greatest men I've ever met in my life. And I lived with them. Once they got married, I lived with them for a year or two, and they had bought a house up in Julian. If you're familiar with San Diego, Julian's a very beautiful place up in the mountains. They kind of bought a cabin up there, and they were going up there, on the weekend. They were weekenders for a long time. Well, my stepdad, if you will, was retiring from the post office, and he was able to retire a couple years early because he just never took vacations. His wife had passed away in the 70s or 80s, early 80s, I think 70s. And they came to me one day after he retired and said, "Hey, we're moving to Julian." And I said, "I can't move to Julian. It's too far for me to drive to work." And my mom says, "No, you don't understand. We're moving to Julian. You're not moving to Julian." And I was kind of, thrown back a little bit, but no big deal. She goes, "But you can rent the house. You're probably going to need a roommate. This is what the rent's going to be." And so I got a roommate and I lived in the house I grew up in as a single adult. And I had a friend that lived with me that I grew up with. and everything was fine. I went to work, did all the things I did on a regular basis, and then got into relationships later. That's a whole nother podcast, which you've already heard already. So there was no, we were raised very independent. My parents did a good job at making us independent. I think I just said that. Too many parents today aren't raising future adults. And this is my opinion. Times have changed. They're really raising roommates, kids who expect everything, contribute nothing, and grow up without skills, discipline, or resilience that they need to stand on their own. That they need those things so they can stand on their own. We have this society where you can just move in with somebody that's maybe you're in a relationship with. That's a whole nother podcast too. But I think that the kids these days, and I've said it before in my podcast, are not as tough as we were, and they weren't as resilient as we were. And I, but in their defense, I would have to tell you that the job market is much different than it was when I was a kid. And the requirement to have a degree, no matter what you do, you could be a courtesy clerk like I was, or a whatever they call them these days. They might require a degree for that, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. But it's the reality. Entitlement isn't a kid's problem. It's a leadership problem. It's what we've allowed our kids to do. And I have to tell you, after raising kids for 39 years, having two grandchildren at home in this generation is definitely different than when I was raising my kids. All my kids either had jobs in high school or were ready to get jobs in high school. And they did that. And some of them stayed at those jobs for a while and got an education. Some of them stayed at those jobs for a while and did not get an education, formal education. But they all moved out. A couple of them had to move out, per my wife and I. And if they didn't want to follow the rules, then they couldn't live with us. And we had a couple kids that didn't want to follow the rules and they wanted to get on their own, and they got on their own quick, like really quick. But they're resilient and they were disciplined and they figured it out, right? We have a couple kids, one daughter that has a high school sweetheart. They're married, they have three kids, and they did a great job. They bought a house at this point, they've done all these things. I'm not sure the kids that we're raising these days are have the tools to do that. Again, my opinion, I'm not an expert. It's just in 39 years of raising kids and watching other parents and how they treat their kids and how they talk to them on a regular basis is much different than what we did. Yesterday, we went to Grandparents' Day at my granddaughter's school, and you could see. So you had these different generations there, and how the parents communicated with the kids versus the grandparents communicating with the kids. And they had us do a task, like an art task with the kids, and it was fun. It's not something that my parents would ever participated in. They just didn't do that. My parents were not my friend. They were not my hangout buddies. They were my parents, and they told me what to do, and I did what they said. Once I got moved out, I could do whatever I wanted, which wasn't a good idea a lot of times. Just like I was a young man with a house, you know, uh, living with a roommate that was my age. And sometimes we didn't do things that were, you know, perfect. We had a good time, but it wasn't always that. And then I met somebody and got married, and I did the whole like traditional thing, you know, the way I did. The way we were not our kids' friends, and we would spend a lot of time with our kids, but we weren't their friends. I wasn't hanging out with their friends. Their friends could have been at the house. I wasn't there to hang out with their friends. They were young people, and I was not. So it's funny. This episode exposes the gap between what parents say and kind of what they're actually teaching. If you look at when I go to her school and I'm interacting with other parents there, you get a whole different vibe of what they're doing for their children versus what we did for them. I did not take my kids everywhere when they needed to go somewhere. They figured a way to get there, and they did whatever. Now the parents are like Uber drivers. They just take them everywhere they want to go, or they have electric bikes if they can get anywhere they want to go. We didn't have that. In fact, I would not even ask my parents for a ride somewhere, to be honest with you, when I was a kid, because I knew the answers. You got a bike, you got feet, you got a skateboard, you got buses, you have all those things. And you know what? It really built character to be able to be, um, to be resourceful. So we had to, if we wanted to go somewhere, we had to figure out a way to do it. We just didn't have the same way it is now. And I'm not criticizing the parents these days. I think what a lot of parents do is they get raised a certain way and they say, "Well, I didn't like that, and I'm never going to do that to my kids." Well, sometimes what your parents were doing for you was a blessing and not just, discipline because they didn't like you. They had reasons why they instructed you to do things a certain way. There were reasons why you had a routine. We had chores when we were growing up. My kids had chores when we were growing up. Frankly, our kids don't have the grandkids we're raising don't have enough chores, and that's on us. My mom didn't make us do a lot when we were kids. We had to kind of take care of our own space, is what she did. She did not want us to have to do chores like she did. She was like her parents were just she was like Cinderella. All she did was chores the whole time. So her mom and stepdad could sit on their asses, and that wasn't how my mom was. She cleaned the house, she did all those things, she cooked dinner, but we were responsible for our own space. So I was incredibly neat when I was a child and always kept my room clean, did my laundry, did all those things. I did my laundry because my mom wouldn't, and she taught me how to do it. So she wasn't going to just wait for me to have dirty clothes. And if I wanted clean clothes, she taught me how to use the laundry. So I would do my own laundry. I can remember a time I had to wear a dress shirt to work and a tie as a courtesy clerk. And I said, "Mom, I have to have this shirt ironed. I got to go to work in like an hour." And she took the ironing board out. She took an iron out. She ironed one arm of the shirt and said, "Now you know how to iron." And that was kind of how we were taught things. Same with working on cars with my dad. We learned those things. I had recently had to work on a car at home and I didn't want to, but the cost of the repair was so expensive. And I'm handy with tools. We learned how to fix cars when I was a kid. And I was telling somebody that I did that, a younger person, and they said, "I wouldn't even know where to start. They don't even know how to open the hood on the engine, on the car." And I was like, "Yeah, well, that's just how we were raised." And like I said, I'm not criticizing this generation. Things have just changed so much. And part of the change has been that the parents are not leaders anymore. They're trying to be their kids' friends. They're trying to have a roommate instead of be in a leadership position and have a child there that needs to grow up. And my grandson works. He's worked a couple different jobs. He's learned some valuable lessons about learning, working at jobs and not liking them and quitting and then not having money. So he's learned some lessons that will probably stay with him his whole life. He's had to learn how to handle people tactfully, especially customers. Not an easy thing to do all the time. But he knows that he's not going to get any sympathy from us if he comes home and tells us something like that happened. I had rude customers, I had rude bosses, I've been fired from jobs, usually for things that weren't right. Of course, everybody's going to say that, but it's true. Um, so I see this what I see happening with these modern parents is the kids aren't accountable for anything. The parents clean the room, they wash their clothes, they do everything for them. They take them anywhere they want to go. It's funny when the kids were growing up, they'd get invited to a birthday party, and it was very rare that it would be a location like I don't know, like a Chuck E. Cheese or something like that. It might be at a park, it might be at someone's house. And I think parents liked inviting us because we'd bring 10 people with us, or 8 to 10 people. Excuse me, we'd bring 6 to 8 kids with us to a birthday party. So if they only had a couple other kids, we kind of populated the party. So, like I said, I just think that, and now I've had to go to, you know, water parks and trampoline parks and Chuck E. Cheese and all these places. These parents just spend so much money on these kids for birthday parties. I think when I was growing up, I can only remember one time having a birthday party, and I think I was maybe 5 years old. This just wasn't something our parents did. They couldn't afford it. They didn't have time for it. When it was our birthday, they'd tell you happy birthday and, maybe make you something you wanted to eat or whatever. It just wasn't that big a deal. Now it's like the prom. When our kids went to prom, that was another thing. So we were in pretty good financial situation and we helped pay for limousines and things like that. Of course, our thought was this is once in a lifetime thing and they'd be safer in a limo than they would be driving. But we didn't do it every time. I mean, it was once in a while that happened and we'd pitch in and pay our kids' share. But it's just now everything is just like I said, it's like a everything's a celebration. Everybody gets an award, everybody gets a trophy, and you hear those jokes. It's true. And I tell you what, it's not just kids. I see it on LinkedIn all the time where everybody's having an awards banquet and this and that, and they're patting themselves on the back. My parents, when we were kids, we never got paid for grades. I knew a lot of kids that got money for getting grades. For every A you get, we'll pay you $5 or whatever the case may be. I mentioned that to my dad one time, and he says, "Look, you're supposed to get good grades. I'm not going to pay you for something you're supposed to do. So don't ever ask that again." And I didn't. And I got a very small allowance when I was a kid, just enough money to get a snack here or there or whatever, or lunch. And but we weren't spoiled as children, believe me. When I was 14 years old, I went to my dad and asked him about going school shopping. He says, "Look, you work all the time. You're mowing lawns, you're washing cars. I'm not going to buy you what you want anyway, so you can start buying your school clothes." And I'm like, okay, so I did. It wasn't, you didn't argue with him. It wasn't, the argument wouldn't go anywhere. If you wanted to try to argue with my dad, that was not a good idea. So the question remains, are we raising independent kids? Or are we raising roommates? Are we raising kids that can get out there in the world? And I see kids going to college and, on Facebook, and I see the parents taking them to college and doing this and paying for this and paying for that. And I don't think it's a good idea. I just don't. I think that kids need a little bit of pain. We helped our kids with school a little bit with books and things like that. But I can tell you, if I could have afforded it and I would have sent them to a 4-year college and they would have drank for 4 years and partied, I would have been pissed. I'm not going to send my kids to school to party. If they want to go learn something, they could do that. They want to go to a trade school, they could do that. There's ways to pay for it, and my kids did. I didn't. I did not pay for my kids' education. The ones that are educated got loans, they got grants, they got scholarships, they did whatever they had to do. And you know what? I think they're better off for it for a couple reasons. One, they have some pride in something that they accomplished. There's a lot to be said for that. The kids these days are just got their hands out with their parents all the time. And I'm not saying every kid. There's good parents out there and the ones that are doing it aren't bad parents. It's just the way they've kind of assimilated the information that they have about raising kids. And I just think that we need to toughen kids up a little bit because they're bad employees a lot of times. I talked about this in my last podcast about kids being coachable. We need to teach them that they need to be able to be coachable. They need to be able to be taught things. They need to pay attention when somebody's telling them or instructing them how to do something. It could be a matter of life or death at times when it comes to safety and things like that. So I just think a lot of kids are growing up without skills. They can't speak to people in a good manner because they're on their phones all the time. The worst one is I'm driving back from my granddaughter's school, and I see kids on their electric bike on their phone while they're doing 40 miles an hour down the street. Is that a little bit dangerous, you think? I think it might be. And these are kids that haven't been instructed or taught or they've been coddled too much. And I just think that we're just in this generation of coddling. And I'll tell you, it's going to get worse because with AI and the jobs it's going to replace, you're going to have to be really resourceful. You're going to have to be really out there, um, trying to be aggressive with employers and finding jobs and thinking on your own 2 feet. But if your parents have done it for all these years, what are you going to do? Now, it's nice if your parents have enough money to leave you a ton of money in the future. I don't think that's the case for most of these parents. My granddaughter goes to a school. It's in a very wealthy area. It's a different environment than I grew up in. It's a different environment that I went to school in. And, we were I I don't even know another way to put it. We were just tougher kids, and we had a lot more responsibility back then. We took classes at school about coping with crisis, about how to write a check. I know you guys don't even know what a check is, you kids these days, but we'd have to balance our checking account. We didn't have our parents filling up, adding money to a card so we could, go get a $6 cup of coffee. So I don't mean to be such a downer today, but the truth about entitlement, responsibility, and leadership at home is a big deal. Um, and I saw that when you're working with younger people when I was in the construction industry who didn't have they were in leadership positions because of a degree they might have had, but they didn't have the leadership skills, right? We don't teach those enough. We might teach management or supervisory skills, but we're not teaching people how to be leaders. And that includes a lot of other things. It's a whole nother podcast, to be honest with you. And you're going to see those leadership podcasts coming soon. And through my ground truth leadership audit business, you'll see a lot of those leadership things start to be talked about. And like I said before, I learned a lot of that from being a parent. So are we giving our kids emotional resilience? Are we teaching them how to be in relationships, how to handle relationships? What example are we setting for them at home in our own relationships between mother and father or, parents, I should say? I don't know, man. It's a lot different than it used to be. And I hope that your kids, I know they'll survive, but I hope they have less pain. If you teach them a lot of these discipline skills up front, they're going to have a lot of less pain. I have a guest coming on my show I see his posts on LinkedIn, and he's got a great outlook. He's very intelligent. He talks a lot about leadership and children and parents making mistakes and parents having successes and all those things. Look, hindsight's 2020. You can always look back on your life and go, man, I should have done things that way, or I could have invested in this, or I could have done that. We kind of have to do what we have to do on the fly. And I don't know if our kids are learning that, how to adjust and refocus and, change directions on a regular basis. It's funny. I was talking to a priest one time and he was kind of explaining something within the church. And he says, if you send a child to camp for the summer, let's say they're going to summer camp for 4 weeks, and there's an itinerary of what they're going to do each week, every day, whatever, what time they're going to eat, all these things. You have this itinerary for how it's going to go. This is not what's going to happen. This is just kind of an outline of what they're going to do. And if that same child or your child wrote you a letter every day, they would tell you stories within that framework, right? They would tell you, today, you know, Jimmy did this and Lisa did that, and the teacher didn't like what this person did and all that. And maybe they're saying, I had so much fun doing this. I never understood how fun it would be to get on a rope swing or whatever the context is. And you had this bunch of letters when they came back from camp. The itinerary was one thing, the outline, the framework was one thing. All these individual experiences is what really makes the whole camping or the whole 4 weeks, the exciting part. That's what life is about. I can sit here and tell you what you should do with your children and and go on the fact that I'm not an authority, I'm not an expert, I'm not any of those things. And I don't ever want anybody to think that. Like I said, I've just been doing this for 39 years and I've learned a couple things. Those letters that those kids would write you about that camping trip, that's life, right? Those are the things that are going to happen. That's meeting this wonderful girl when you're 18 years old and you have butterflies in your stomach and everything else, and 6 months later you're broke up because of her behavior or your behavior or whatever it is. Those are just those experiences. We can't forecast those experiences. I've had companies where I worked at that got sold underneath me. I mean, I was working there one day and the next day they tell me, oh, the company got sold. Well, what's going to happen? Well, I don't know. I sold the company. It depends on what the new management wants to do. Those are those letters, right? Those are those letters that frame the experience, that tell you about what's happened in your life. And that's all this podcast is me going back and saying, hey, this happened and this is how we handled it. And we handled it with the best information we had at that time. So I'm not going to belabor the point. You get what I'm talking about. Are we raising roommates or are we raising independent people that can go out and survive in this world, which is pretty brutal sometimes? I got news for you. Watch the news once in a while. Not too much because it's a pain, but there's a lot of things going on in the world. And now with AI and social media telling you who you're supposed to be, you need to not listen to it. You need to turn it off if they're telling you who you should be. You should be who you are and live those experiences and get the most out of life as you can. That's the message for the kids. That's a message. When I say kids, I mean parents that are raising kids now. Spend time with your kids. Enjoy it. It's not going to last forever. It goes very quick. That's the bad news. The good news is it's an awesome trip. So enjoy your kids while they're young. Teach them some things. Leave a legacy for them. This is the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. This is Raising 10, episode 19. Please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. In my playlist on my YouTube channel are all the parenting podcasts I've done. Um, I'm doing the best I can at remembering the things with kids. And now that they're grown and they have their own kids, and I have grandkids that are almost not, my oldest grandchild is almost 19 years old. Um, it's been a joy to be a parent, and I'm not checking out. I'm just saying there's so many better things than the bad things. But I can tell you, if you really want to do something for your children, teach them how to be responsible, teach them how to be resourceful, and teach them how to be empathetic because the world is not a fun place all the time. And be there for them to lean on you and have a great time. Thanks again for listening. Another episode coming next week. If you have any topics you'd like me to talk about, go to my social media and just DM me or put something on a post and I'll see what I can do. And if it requires an expert, I'll see if I can find one. So anyway, thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy yourself.